Welcome back, everyone, to the Week 4 lecture for Intro to Academic Writing. I hope that your essays are going well. Just a reminder that they're due on Friday of this week and that you've got to submit them through Milo. But I hope everything's going well. Just get in touch with your tutor or myself if you want to run anything by us in that regard. So what are we doing for today? We're going to be looking at three different things. So number one is critical thinking. Uh, the second part is looking at a 10-minute grammar point, so nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. And then the third one will be a kind of question time that we have reflecting on what we talked about today. So this is an opportunity for everyone to recap on what we've done last week, what we talked about in terms of reading, styles of reading, the way you understand information from reading a text. The reason that we place an emphasis on this particular skill is that in years to come, you guys will be in your degree of choice and you will be out there on your own in the library trying to find out more information about particular subjects. So, in order to do that, you need to be able to sift through a number of different journal articles and books and so on and so forth, and you need to decide where the important information is. So, when we take you through things like skimming and scanning, it's in order to really help identify and refine those skills. So, we're going to have a quick conversation about critical thinking today. Now, just to reinforce that the essay that you're handing in on Friday doesn't require a particular argument or something of that nature. This is actually something we're moving on to for the next essay that you will do. So, critical thinking is something that will be really important to everything that you do at university. The ability to identify information and to think critically about it is really key. Okay, so what we have here is we actually have a YouTube uh, clip to watch. Just excuse me while I get rid of that little thing there and see if that works. So we have a YouTube video for you to watch here. So this is actually to help you understand the process of thinking critically and the way in which material can shift according to that process. So for distance students and for people listening to the this lecture at home, this is an opportunity for you to go through to that video. Now, the video is a kind of mock job interview. When you go through and look at it, it will be fairly self explanatory as to what you need to look at there. You need to make critical judgments about the way that interview actually ran and the sorts of decisions that the interviewer and the interviewee made. Um, Now, I showed this clip to my lecture last semester, and they had some pretty forthright views either way. But essentially, what I would like you to think about when you watch that video is who is being fair, who is being unfair. Can we even make judgments in that way? Is it as clear as saying that someone is 100% fair and someone is 100% unfair? But I want you to start thinking about the way in which that played out and perhaps what you regard as the proper judgment in that as well, because this is starting to get you thinking about critical thinking and the role it plays in the way you see the world and the way you see university. So this again for distance students and for people watching this lecture at home, what conclusions can we draw from this exercise? This is about you thinking critically about this clip that you've just watched and trying to decide who is in the right, who is in the wrong, maybe how things should have been done differently. And those sorts of initial questions can be the essence of critical thinking. So, what has this got to do with critical thinking? Um, it's as I've said previously, this is really an exercise to help you understand the way your brain tends to shift when you're thinking about things critically. So, firstly, what is critical thinking not? Critical thinking does not mean criticizing or being negative. And certainly, one thing I hope that you will get from this unit is the ability to put forward a view without actually criticizing a person, respectfully being able to engage in debate and conversation is a really critical part of university. When I talk about critical thinking, it doesn't mean criticizing a person. According to the University of Canberra, when you are thinking critically, you are not just thinking passively and accepting everything you see and hear. You are thinking actively. You are asking questions about what you see and hear, evaluating, categorizing, and finding relationships. That really is the essence of critical thinking. So, what the first part of this quote suggests is that critical thinking is not just accepting things passively and just blindly accepting everything that you see and hear. So, if you watch people, perhaps watching television, you might be watching the news, and there are lots and lots of people who simply absorb that information and don't think critically about it. They take it as truth. But what we would like you to do at university is think actively. And that's the next sentence in that quote, thinking actively. You are probably best positioned to ask questions about what you see and hear. You should be evaluating, you should be categorizing, and you should be finding relationships between particular elements of information. That is the essence of thinking critically. So here, um, again, I'm very conscious of the fact that you will all be going on to degrees of one nature and another, and you will have to think critically all the time rather than just passively accepting what you see and hear. Think about it, evaluate it, ask questions, interrogate that information, categorize that information, and find relationships between pockets of information. So this is a second definition. So critical thinking is a cognitive activity. So it means that it's to do with thinking and the brain. Critical thinking is a cognitive activity associated with using the mind. Learning to think in critically analytical and evaluative ways means using mental processes such as attention, categorization, selection, and judgment. So similar definition in the sense that this is to do with activity in the brain. Learning to think critically and evaluate particular things means using your brain to figure out how to categorize things, to select particular things, and to make judgments. One thing that universities are very passionate about and have been since their inception is that you guys will come in and you will teach other people how to think differently about things that we think we already know. So there will be those of you who potentially will go into, for instance, science or an arts degree or engineering, and there will be things that you are taught in that degree that actually, through your own research, you end up identifying as perhaps being something we should look at differently. And that is your role as a researcher in the university. So, according to the UTAS website, Briefly, critical thinking means thinking well and applying sound intellectual standards to your thinking. It involves self evaluation, thinking about your thinking, and being sure that you are not jumping to conclusions. You should be prepared to consider all aspects of an issue before making up your mind and to avoid letting personal bias or prejudice interfere with your reasoning. Critical thinking is important for most academic tasks, including reading, tutorial discussions, written assignments, and exam answers. So, again, it's a fairly comprehensive definition of what this idea of critical thinking is. Now, one thing that I would like to draw your attention to in this definition is the idea that you should be prepared to consider all aspects of an issue before making up your mind and to avoid letting personal bias or prejudice interfere with your reasoning. That's a very difficult thing to do. And sometimes it takes many years for people to truly be able to do that. If you come to an idea and you have biases and you have ways that you've always thought about a particular thing. Politics might be a good example. Perhaps you think about particular political parties and particular politicians in certain ways. Rather than relying on what you've always thought, critical thinking and the concept of critical thinking invites you to really weigh up all the different possibilities and all the different ways you could think about a concept and perhaps to challenge your own thinking and challenge the thinking of others. It's a very courageous way to use your brain. And subsequently, confusingly, critical thinking is hard to define. It can be thought of as better, more rigorous thinking, but what critical thinking or analysis is differs in relationship to the context, the situation, and the material to which it is applied. So, what I would like you to maybe pause and have a think about right now is how does critical thinking shift in different contexts? So, how is critical thinking different in daily life to life at university? And then, how might critical thinking be different in the university preparation program and different disciplines like engineering, history, medicine, English literature, and so on and so forth? So, what I would like you to do is to pause and have a think about that. And I would invite you to write down your ideas and your responses on the discussion board in Milo for UPP025 Intro to Academic Writing. And now I'm just going to pause before I go on to the grammar point, and I'll be back shortly.